Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Joyal Mulheron. A Washington insider, Joyal has served both Republican and Democratic lawmakers. She spent several years at the National Governors Association, where she advised former Governor Mike Huckabee when he was NGA chairman, and was an advisor to the Obama White House. A graduate of Virginia Tech with degrees in both biochemistry and English and a minor in chemistry, Joyal started her career at the American Cancer Society in Washington, D.C., managing emerging science and trends, building its genetic portfolio, and coordinating legislative policy priorities across states. After spending more than a decade to improve the health and well-being of all Americans, Joyal encountered few support systems before, during, and after the death of her daughter. Given the significant hardships families face, Joyal hopes to change the landscape for bereaved families because losing a child changes everything. Today, Joyal is the founder of Evermore, a nonprofit making the world a more livable place for bereaved families. Joyal, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for that generous introduction.
Of course. Joyal, can you tell us more about your journey and how that led to such a shift in your own career?
So years ago, there were a series of events that occurred, public events. I was continuing to go to work every day after our daughter died, and often waking up to the news and just hearing another mass casualty event, another natural disaster, and so forth. And I remember there was Trayvon Martin and Hydea Pendleton and the hotshot firefighters and the Washington mudslide and the Sandy Hook massacre. And I just remember thinking something else needs to exist for bereaved families. I am not a therapist. I don't know anything about hosting a support group, seeing clients and helping folks, if you will, firsthand through their experiences. But I felt that there was something different that hopefully I could offer the field. And over time that has evolved substantially to really going back to my roots, and what I've spent most of my career doing is public policy and beginning to shift public health issues or frame a public health platform, if you will, on bereavement generally. So Evermore is focused on doing just that, and hopefully beginning, if you will, a paradigm shift on the conversations of bereavement. There's so many folks, if you will, on the front lines who've been doing this work for decades, and with, I think, little resources and not enough support. And my hope is that we're going to be able to spotlight the issue and begin to shift some of the nation's resources to help those frontline providers, but also help bereaved individuals and families.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in a conversation that you and I had prior, you used a term that I absolutely loved, which was bereavement care professionals. You have professionals of all type, but we didn't really have, I guess, a label. We knew what we were, but we really didn't have a label. And I've been using that in my everyday language. And so thank you to you for really making that upfront. We are bereavement care professionals.
You are. And I know that, at least traditionally there's been a frame of mental health around the issue, and certainly mental health is part of it. But I think it's so much bigger than that. When you have a bereavement event, of a dear loved one. I mean, just looking at the science, bereaved spouses, parents, and siblings are all at risk of premature death as a result of their loss. Premature death is not simply a mental health issue. It's much bigger than that. And there are lots of other compounding health, social problems that occur for families. And I, would go as far to say that a significant bereavement event for an individual, it threatens their health, their well-being, their economic solvency, and the family's stability. So I really feel that bereavement care begins to, if you will, capture that larger tide that the families or those individuals are facing. And frankly, it's taken a lot of time to come to that terminology. This didn't happen overnight. I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with professionals and bereaved families. And I just think the frontline providers are doing everything they can to provide family stability and to help those individuals cope. And I think bereavement care frames it rather nicely.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, I would also say just, again, the use of the word bereavement as opposed to grief or grieving. There's a lot of things we grieve over, obviously. The death of someone is one of those things. And using the word bereavement in and of itself is advocating, it's educating, it's trying to change the way we understand, what that is. A lot of people may not even know what bereavement is. So just by using that language gives an opportunity to educate, I think.
I wholly agree with you. I was just with the COVID-19 being in the news and people talking about grief and in the bereavement community, grief is the normalized term, if you will. But I think I often say to people, you grieve a job loss, you can, grieve from an amputation or a divorce even. Bereavement grief is specialized. And you need a specialized professional to come and support the individual in that moment of crisis. And we do that for other medical disciplines. And I think that would be apt here. In fact, I often say, if you have lost someone from cancer, you might need different or more tailored supports than someone who has faced a violent or criminal death, an unexpected death. And there are specialized technicians, if you will, who can go in and who have done some phenomenal work in the United States. But those practices need to be more broadly adopted. And we need to have more bereavement professionals and not just grief professionals, to your point, Andy, but bereavement professionals who are able to support these families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the other things that I've seen as an issue, and it's just great to have you working on a number of these things and advocating and with your expertise in just the area of politics and how to be an insider when it comes to that. One of the things that has frustrated, quite honestly, me throughout the years working with families is there's this ongoing debate about bereavement, whether we need a bereavement diagnosis and the DSM, and is it reimbursable, is it not reimbursable, all these things. I would love to see bereavement not recognized as a diagnosis. You don't have to diagnose someone with bereavement, but I would love to see it recognized by insurance companies as a true need that people have to see a counselor, a bereavement care professional, attend a support group, whatever it might be, so that it could be reimbursable without us having to turn it into a disorder, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that's something that...
Wholly. No, I've been spending some time talking to some of the researchers as well on the new DSM and diagnosis, and I also talk to a lot of families, and so we are working and threading through all of this and trying to find a good spot to land, because I would submit to you that an insurance company can't right now reimburse because there's so many quote unquote grief professionals right now who do not have that sophisticated training. And so if they were to open up their checkbooks, if you will, they're sort of opening it up to everyone who can go to a website and click that they do grief, which is different than those people who are very specialized. And so we do need to get to that level of designation, because those frontline providers are stemming health and well-being declines. And that is in a direct interest with a health insurance company. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also, as you say, changing the paradigm shift, because the 5 stages of grief are still taught in universities today, which implies that grief starts on a particular date and it ends on a particular date. Well, we as bereavement care professionals know that that's not the case. And so it's really re-educating society that grief is a lifelong journey. And there are stages and there are triggers throughout one's life that can really affect one's emotional and physical well-being. And how to address that and recognize that as a real issue.
I wholly agree.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a tough one. So what are you doing in Washington? I know that you're trying to create a coalition. And how is that going for you? And what are your steps and processes?
Yeah, so things actually have been going remarkably well. A couple of weeks ago, I won't get into too much of the details, but a couple of weeks ago in the House, there was, if you will, blitz to advance some bereavement care language in the U.S. budget. So we've attached bereavement care report language to the FY21 United States budget, ergo it's likely to pass because we have to pass a U.S. budget. That would require, for the first time in our nation's history, key federal health agencies to report to Congress what they are doing on bereavement care, if anything. Yeah, it's actually pretty sizable and pretty remarkable. I would tell you that someone said this is the Doug Flutie moment for bereavement because appropriation season in DC is very limited. It is time stamped and the door opens and it swiftly closes. And if you do not meet the benchmark when the door closes, that's it. You've got to wait a year. And so I won't get into all the details that occurred, but the Doug Flutie analogy is very apt here. And it was not me per se. I was merely the coordinator of a national response where families and professionals were calling offices in essentially a 24-hour period. In one office, they crashed the phone lines. And it was remarkable to just see the people contributing. I certainly know a lot of the personal stories and the professional stories that drew people to this. And knowing here, I had a unique perspective on this because I had an understanding of what these offices were hearing. They were hearing from people, who are treating, 1,000 folks a month. They're hearing from, parents who had lost their children to overdose and to suicide and to accidents and, all sorts of things. And that moved people. I mean, we're new. When you talk about bereavement care, these offices have never had taken a meeting on bereavement care. I mean, what the heck is this lady talking about? They take the meeting, they not only take the meeting, but now they advance the language, they attach it to, on the House side, they attach it to the US budget. And the chair of health appropriations in the House, if you will, adopted it and included it. And then the chair of all appropriations for the House endorsed the language, which is significant.
I was going to say, that sounds like a huge step for bereavement care.
It is huge. And I'll just say, I mean, we've been having enormously successful meetings on the Senate side as well. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, we've had I don't even know what the percentage fold is, but people who are coming to the issue who want to also advocate. We have to get the terminology to just go back to the beginning of the conversation. We have to get the dictionary set now. We have to get people talking from the same songbook so that we can begin to advance this. So this particular effort is important, not to just get federal health agencies to be thinking about this, but reporting what they're doing. We now will have a catalog of what they're doing or what they're not doing. It also signals to these federal health agencies, Congress is thinking about this, and therefore you need to be thinking about this. And so as they're putting forth next year's budget and so forth, Congress may have questions for them because these offices are seeing overdose deaths and suicide deaths and mass casualties, and they don't know what to do either. Yeah. And so I think this is, if you will, the first lily pad that we need to hop across. We need to continue to socialize the issue. We need to continue to raise its importance. We need to find our champions, and champions are not just people who say it's great, but people who will pick up the ball and move it down the field. And Lloyd Doggett was the House member where there was a confluence of efforts, and he picked up the ball and was able to give us the Doug Flutie moment a couple of weeks ago. We need to find, the other Lloyd Doggetts in both the House and the Senate to move it forward. Ultimately, what we want here is we want increased investment in research. We want increased investment in family programming, and we want increased investment in professional resources. And so, those three things will give families and professionals more tools and opportunities to preserve their well-being and health and economic solvency and so forth in the future. That's the long game.
I think there's also an importance in this that we're not touching on. The field of bereavement care professionals, we all strive for a common good goal, but yet there's really no guideline or qualification or standard is really the word I should put out there. And this could be the beginning of something that at least has some standardization in it to be qualified as a bereavement care professional.
So I think that's right. And one of the things that I'm very cognizant of in doing this work, I'm very concerned that, there are professionals with very advanced degrees who have a lot of qualifications. And then there are the people who are also on the front lines who, don't have the resources for advanced degrees, or that time in their life has passed. And so one of the things that is on the forefront of my mind is what sort of investments would be required in order to get those frontline staff operating at a level of those advanced degree individuals. And I do think that would ultimately be an infusion of federal funding to get the workforce, if you will, brought up to speed. I often think of a lot of these folks as similar to teachers. They are spending a lot of time, a lot of extra effort. They are personally connected to their clients. They want them to be successful, and they have, if you will, they have to bring to bear their own personal resources, whether it's for education or skipping a soccer game because a family's in crisis. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of investments that the nation needs to be making, because bereavement itself is a significant event for people. And those frontline providers, we are not making an assumption that, if you will, that those individuals should somehow personally invest limited wealth, if you will, in advancing their education. I think this is the type of thing that Congress is poised to do.
Yeah, and it is a life-altering event. I mean, for many, and sometimes the altering event comes years later too, especially for those that don't get the supportive services that they need. They don't identify a trigger with their bereavement.
Sure.
Can often come years later.
I was actually just having a conversation, maybe even earlier today, where we were making the analogy to diet and nutrition and exercise. I mean, if you put it off and you are not practicing a healthy diet or exercising and just putting and kicking the can, you are beginning now to threaten your health and your well-being and that stability. And this too can bear true for bereavement, and that having people, those frontline providers, help you adapt, help you cope so that you can get your sea legs back underneath you again and you can return to life. And it might take considerable time, but you can get there again. And that's the thing, is that we want to help people to live again, and to laugh again, and to know that that's a possibility.
Yeah. Joyal, we only have a few minutes left. This has been fantastic. Quite often our listeners want to know how they can connect with you, connect with your work, with what you're doing. If you could just take a minute and share how they might be able to do that.
Sure. So there are two ways. So we certainly have our website, and on our website, we have a couple of different ways, particularly if you're interested in advocacy. We also have information available too, but there are links on our website to be part of the advocacy movement. The website is live, L-I-V-E, -evermore, EVERMORE.org. So that's live-evermore.org. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. There are not a lot of Joyals in the whole world. So I'm sure if you just Google Joyal, and if you even add Mulheron, undoubtedly you'll find me, and you can connect with me over LinkedIn. Although I do ask that people just send me a brief note, because sometimes I get a lot of invitations, and if I don't know the individual, I'm not inclined to accept it.
Yeah, right.
Joyal, we want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show here at Let's Talk Death, and for sharing your journey and the story behind your work.
You guys are really phenomenal, and thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we also want to thank those who have joined us for this episode. We certainly are glad that you were with us as well.
Make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, you can visit us at healgrief.org. You can learn more about all that we do, including our program called Actively Moving Forward. So with that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Death.